Bit of a rarity this weekend at Orioles spring training. 3 games and 3 games that you could actually track and know what was going on. So I'll break down everything I saw from the broadcast, from the data in Sarasota and elsewhere this weekend for the Orioles, coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, March 3rd, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode is going to be a whole bunch of Orioles spring training news and notes. They played 3 games over the weekend, 2 of them broadcasted, 2 of them had StatCast. We have a lot to comb through for some guys trying to make this opening day roster. We got some news on injuries and guys getting back to the field. We had some interesting pitchers who popped in some of these games, some top prospects who continue to impress here this spring. Going to try to fit it all into about a 30-minute episode here on a Monday. Lot of cool topics to cover. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. So it was a busy weekend at Orioles spring training. They were on the road against the Twins on Friday afternoon, and although there was not a TV broadcast of that one, there was StatCast data. We've got a lot to dive into from a 13-10 Orioles win on Friday. Then on Saturday, they were back at home in Sarasota at Ed Smith Stadium. There was no StatCast, but there was a Masson broadcast on Saturday, so I'll talk about what I saw from that. And then finally, they were in Clearwater against the Phillies on Sunday. The Phillies had a split squad game, but the game was broadcast by NBC Sports Philadelphia, and there was StatCast for that one, so a whole lot to get to from Sunday. We'll talk about pitchers that stood out. We'll talk about hitting performances and some other news and notes, injury, starting rotation, some words from Brandon Hyde from the weekend. A lot of good stuff coming up. So let's begin with some of the notes and the news I saw on Orioles pitchers from the 3 spring training games this weekend. Let's start with Zach Eflin, who made his first spring start on Friday against the Twins. He was the final Orioles starting pitcher to take the ball this spring training, mostly because he was here a couple of days late because his wife just had their 4th child right before pitchers and catchers reported. So Eflin was like 2 or 3 days late to spring. You can imagine why when you have another newborn in that house. Danielle Allentuck wrote a good story about it in the Baltimore Banner late last week. Eflin now has 4 children under 4. I believe it's a 3.5-year-old, and then there are twins that are in between 1 and 2, and then another child that was just born. My shout out goes to the Eflin family, especially his wife, as he now has to report to spring training. Luckily, they're from Florida, live in Florida. I believe the kids in the family are around some, so that makes it a little bit easier. But Danielle wrote a great story in the Banner about how Eflin is living with some of the Orioles' young stars. He is in like the Cowser, Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson house this spring. Ryan Mountcastle's in that house. The 2 of them played in high school together. I think Eflin was maybe a senior when Mountcastle was a freshman, and they were on the same varsity baseball team for 1 year in high school in Florida. So that was kind of the connection there. But yeah, he's got a bunch of kids running around at home and seemingly a bunch of kids running around at that spring training house as well. But great story from Danielle. But she also wrote in that story about the tweaks that Eflin is making. And we discussed it on the podcast last week when I did his season review, how good he was for the Orioles in those 2 months after coming over at the deadline via that trade with the Rays, and how the Orioles still have him for this year and then will be a free agent. I think he's a perfect extension candidate for the O's. But he's working on his curveball a little bit. It was a pitch that by StatCast run value was actually the worst of his 6 pitches in 2024, but a lot of that was struggles when the first 4 months when he was with the Rays. When Eflin came over to Baltimore in those final 2 months, the Orioles already started working on his curveball. And in those final 2 months, he had a whiff rate of over 40% against that curveball in August and September. That is very, very elite for a pitch that hasn't really been for his whole career his main strikeout pitch. It has at times, but the Orioles started taking away some of the horizontal break. And we heard from Eflin, and this was in Danielle's story, that he was basically worried that his curveball was looking too much like his sweeping slider because the curveball had enough horizontal movement. Remember, vertical movement for a right-handed curveball is just the ball going straight down. Then that horizontal movement when a righty throws it is going right to left, kind of moving away from a right-handed hitter. And he thought, well, I already have this sweeper that moves directly horizontal across the zone. My curveball is maybe moving too much and the pitches look too similar. You almost want, your pitches to look similar at the beginning and then their break to be different. Sometimes if a lot of pitches move the same, it's easier for a hitter to key in on the things you're throwing and can get to you a little bit faster when you are facing an opposing lineup. So showing this chart here, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, this is from Baseball Savant and StatCast. This is the horizontal break by inches for Zach Eflin's curveball month by month during the 2024 season. You can see it here, in April and May with the Rays, he was up towards 13 inches of horizontal break. That's almost like a slider at that point. That's how much that was breaking right to left. And then beginning in June, when he was still with Tampa, he started bringing it down a little bit and down a little bit in July. And then late July, he gets traded to the Orioles. And you can see it goes all the way down to about 9 inches. So he loses 4 inches of horizontal break from his time with the Rays to his time with the Orioles. And that is something he continued in that first spring start on Friday. Now, we only saw an inning of him. It wasn't a whole lot, but he was all the way down to 6 inches of horizontal break on the curveball on Friday. So he had gone from 13 to 9 with the Orioles last year. Now over the winter, he's gone from 9 to 6. He's basically trying to make it closer to the classic 12-6 curveball that almost drops straight down. Now, it's never going to drop completely straight down. It's always going to move a little bit to the left when you just are a righty throwing a curveball. But Eflin did a good job of working on that pitch and getting it to do what he wanted. And now he has that sweeper that goes right to left, and the curveball is a little more up and down. And already a guy who throws 6 good pitches, this makes him even harder to figure out. And that is a good thing as he continues to just throw the kitchen sink at batters, and really excited to see if this can take him maybe even to another level as he goes into 2025. Now, we saw Albert Suarez pitch this weekend as well. He came in after Eflin on Friday and threw a few innings, and he continued to struggle. His first start wasn't great. Then he went 2 2/3 innings and allowed 5 earned runs on 6 hits on Friday with a strikeout, 2 walks, and a home run. 48 pitches from Suarez in that one. Now, again, you don't worry too much about spring training stat lines, especially for pitchers and especially guys who are working on things. Suarez is working on that new slurve, just like Eflin, kind of altering his breaking balls this spring heading into the season, and that's something he continued to do. But the command has been an issue in both of his spring outings so far for Suarez. And we already know, he's not slotted for the rotation. He's slotted right now to be the long man in the bullpen to open the season. And he has that edge over Povich, even though Povich has been pitching better, and we'll get to that in a moment, because Povich has minor league options and Albert Suarez does not. So it's easier to keep Suarez in the big leagues and send Cade Povich to AAA to begin the year. We've been over that multiple times on the show. And he did debut the new slurve. He got his 1 strikeout was on that slurve. It was a good one, so that's at least a good sign for Suarez from Friday. But if he goes out there again, later this week in his 3rd outing, it looks bad, then I think we can have to start the conversation just a little bit about maybe he's not a lock for this roster, and maybe he is in a little bit of trouble here after what was a fantastic breakout out of nowhere season for Suarez with the O's last year. Speaking of movement on breaking balls, we move on to Yennier Cano, who we got to see on Friday come out and throw 1 inning, allowed a run on 1 hit. But what I was intrigued by was the movement on his slider. It was way, way down. Now, we know Cano as a sinker changeup guy. That's what he's been known for. Hard sinker, devastating changeup. Allowed him to break onto the scene as an all-star in 2023. But then in 2024, hitters started to pick up on Cano, and he had to adjust his outings and adjust his repertoire, and he threw more 4-seam fastballs and started throwing more sliders in certain counts just to keep hitters off balance. And it allowed him to get back to what he can do, which is be a really, really good setup man. But it was interesting on Friday. His slider only had 4 inches of horizontal break. It was used to having about 9 inches last year. So basically his slider had less than half the movement it is used to. It basically looked more like a cutter than a slider in terms of the data from Friday, because we didn't have a broadcast for that game. So just something to think about. That's what his slider was when he first came up. When he first got to the big leagues in 2022 with the Twins and then was traded to the Orioles and pitched a couple of times in the big leagues down the stretch that season. This is what the slider looked like. It was this really, really tiny break. Going to show here again if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. This is Cano's average horizontal break on his slider month to month throughout his career. You can see back in 2022 and early 2023 when he was first called up by the Orioles, it was 3 to 4 inches of horizontal break, sometimes 2. It was basically a cutter. And then you can see what happened basically in June and July of 2023 when he was really pitching well with the Orioles. It shot up to like 7 and 8 inches of horizontal break, and it stayed up there mostly in 2024 with the Orioles last year. So interesting to see that pitch all the way back down to what it was earlier in his major league career. And I'm intrigued to know, we may find out later in the spring, whether it was just because he's a little rusty and he's still working on it, or if it's a legitimate change he is making to that pitch to try and make it more effective and maybe try to make it move or a little differently or have some different velocity. That's something I'm definitely intrigued by as we go through spring training. Now we move to Saturday on the pitching end, Cade Povich. I mean, Cade Povich may be the story of the weekend for the Orioles. He continues to shine in spring training. 3 scoreless innings for Povich, 1 hit, 1 walk, and 6 strikeouts against the Pirates order on Saturday. Now, again, it's the Pirates lineup, and it was not the A team in the starting lineup that the Pirates had put out there either. So that's a grain of salt you have to take a lot of times when you're looking at spring training outings, even for guys who are starting games. And there's generally number 1 guys out there. It wasn't even really fully that for the Pirates. Now, we don't have StatCast data from Saturday, but there was the MASN broadcast. I watched every pitch from Cade Povich. I just thought the command was so good from him on Saturday, especially the fastball, throwing it to the glove side, so outside to lefties, inside to righties. He was just pinpoint with that command. The movement on all of his pitches looked good. He lost a couple of changeups high in the zone, but they still worked out when he did so. Adley Rutschman who caught that game after the start, how impressed he was with Povich's changeup. They actually threw it more than they thought they were going to because it was just so good in the first inning. They just kept it rolling. And this is something I noticed from Povich's first spring start when we did have StatCast data, that he had way less, or I should say a way different movement profile on his changeup. And it almost looked like he's now throwing it with a different grip. We haven't gotten confirmation on that yet, but the movement profile, again, just seeing it with my eyes, again, looked different on Saturday. I think this is a different changeup, and honestly, it looks better. That pitch was awesome Saturday against Pittsburgh, and we keep talking about it. Like, there may not be a space on opening day for Povich on this roster. We'll see, but he is going to be pushing his way quickly to get to the big leagues and really help the Orioles a lot this season if he continues to look like what he did in that second spring start. Now, Seranthony Dominguez didn't have as much success on Saturday. He gave up a couple of home runs in his outing in that game against Pittsburgh when he threw 1 inning, 2 runs, 3 hits, but he did strike out the side with a walk as well, a very up and down inning. But that's kind of the Seranthony Dominguez experience after the Orioles acquired him in a trade with the Phillies for Austin Hayes at the deadline last year. It's amazing stuff. It's strikeout stuff, but he has a home run problem. 15.6% home run to fly ball rate last year between the Phillies and the O's, 15th highest among all major league relievers. And it bumped up to 21.4% in his 2 months in Baltimore. So some of that is concerning. Sometimes a high home run to fly ball rate is just bad luck. So it was a little bit of both for Dominguez. Now, Nick Solak hit a real home run against him. He hung a curveball. Solak turned on it, hit it into the left center field seats. But the first home run he allowed in the inning, now it was to Oneil Cruz, the by far best hitter in the Pirates lineup, and a guy who hits the ball very hard. But Oneil Cruz's home run, and this is why it's important to watch these spring training games as best you can and not just read the box scores, because that was the most Ed Smith Stadium, Sarasota spring training home run of all time. It was basically a lazy fly ball hit down the left field line, and the wind gusting out toward left just kept carrying it, and somehow it landed like 1 row into the seats down the left field line. Off the bat, I mean, Cruz didn't even think it was a homer. He put his head down because he thought he'd flied out to left field, and it turned into a home run. In any regular major league ballpark, that is a fly out to left, so just something to think about. But hey, it did take him 31 pitches to finish the inning. Other than the home runs, the stuff looked really good. I still feel fine with Dominguez at the back end of the Oriole bullpen going into this season. Then moving on to Sunday, where Dean Kramer got the start in that one. And the Orioles, we had both on Sunday. We had the broadcast from the Phillies and we had the StatCast data from Clearwater as well. So fun to look through that stuff. Kremer was really good. He went out there. He threw 3 scoreless innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, 2 Ks, 38 pitches, just 2 hard hit balls against him. And his splitter was what was so fantastic for me. He got 2 swings and misses, but the command was great. The splitter was a pitch he introduced last season to try and be better against left-handers. It had good movement. It had a good profile. He really struggled to command that pitch a lot of the time last season. Started to figure it out late in the year. It seems like he has that command now on that splitter. It was his most used pitch, not his most used off-speed pitch, his most used pitch, period, against the lefties he faced in the Phillies lineup on Sunday. That is going to be a go-to offering. Even with the command issues, it was his number 2 pitch against lefties last season. 4-seam fastball usage was down on Sunday, probably just because he feels good about that pitch and wants to get the other offerings in there. But it was a lot of sinkers and a lot of cutters kind of being used as his main fastball Sunday with that devastating splitter. I mean, there was an at-bat where Kremer struck out Kyle Schwarber on Sunday where he dropped a curveball in for strike 1. Then Schwarber barely got a piece of a splitter for strike 2 for a foul ball, and then swung and missed on an 0-2 splitter that was in the strike zone for strike 3. It was wham, bam, bam, and you're gone. Very, very impressive pitch. Kramer's always kind of been a guy where he's got this wide arsenal, throws a lot of fastballs, can pitch a little deeper into games. He can give you innings when he stays healthy, but there was never like this giant ceiling for Kremer recently, and he never had the big strikeout pitches. I feel like with the command of the splitter, Kremer finally has a true big strikeout pitch to go against, especially against left-handed hitters. That's something he hasn't had in the past. Could mean for a step forward for Dean Kremer in 2025. Then just a couple more, lower name pitchers, guys who certainly won't be on the opening day roster, but guys who pitched on Sunday, who I wanted to touch on, starting with Thaddeus Ward, a right-hander who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Nationals earlier this season, had been a starter in AAA with the Nats last year. 2 years ago was a reliever in the big leagues after they had gotten him in the Rule 5 draft. He gave up 2 homers in 2 innings on Sunday. Neither of them were like absolute bombs or anything. One was definitely a spring training home run that the wind took it out of the ballpark. But the stuff looked really good. He's got a sinker with major arm side run. He's a righty, and the sinker basically looks like a screwball at times. Like, that's how much it is moving to the right. And it's good velocity. It's 92. He was up to 95 with that sinker with really good run. I was really impressed by that pitch. The cutter had some solid movement and good velocity. That was 88, 89 to 91. And then he had that sweeping slider, which had some huge break on it. He threw back-to-back ridiculous sliders to strike out Nick Castellanos, which was really impressive on Sunday. He's certainly not ready to be in the Orioles bullpen on opening day, but he's going to go to AAA Norfolk, and he's got the stuff where I would not be surprised if Thaddeus Ward pitches for the Orioles this season. When the O's claimed him, I was kind of looking around. It was earlier this offseason. I was like, yeah, this guy seems okay, but he looks more like an innings eater than anything as a starter. Well, now I see why the Orioles claimed him. They moved him and said, hey, you're going to be a reliever for us this season. Let that stuff play, and that sinker-sweeper combo can certainly play. That is an exciting arm. Another exciting arm we saw Sunday was Levi Stout, right-handed pitcher who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Mariners last June and kind of split time between AA Bowie and AAA Norfolk with the Orioles. They never brought him back to the big leagues. As a guy who has pitched briefly in the major leagues with the Reds prior to joining the Mariners and the Orioles. But he was, he had a 5.54 ERA in AAA Norfolk with not a lot of innings, 27% strikeout rate. Numbers were way better when he was in AA before he got moved up. But last year it was, this big starter mix, 5-6 pitches. He was throwing a fastball at 93. It was like getting 16 inches of induced vertical break. It was like a fine pitch. All of his pitches were kind of fine. He was trying to eat innings. The Orioles have clearly told him, hey, we see you as a reliever. You are no longer a starter. You are a reliever. That is why we brought you here. And it seems like it took until this offseason for Levi Stout to buy into the fact that he is truly a reliever. He's now healthy, a couple years removed from Tommy John surgery. Well, he was up to, 18 inches of induced vertical break is like elite, that rising action, quote unquote, rising factor of a 4-seam fastball that makes it look like it's going up on hitters. He had an average of 19 inches and maxed out at 21 inches of IVB on Sunday. That is like crazy good stuff, like Felix Bautista level movement, quote unquote, up on your 4-seam fastball. And the velocity was 96 to 97. He was 93 on that pitch last year. So that is exciting stuff from Levi Stout. Again, a guy who's going to start the year in the Tide's bullpen, who's not on the 40-man roster, just like Thaddeus Ward, but another guy who maybe the like kind of no-name-ish pitcher who has impressed me the most so far this spring. Not quite to the level that Albert Suarez did last year in spring with the Orioles, but Levi Stout really had me open my eyes on Sunday. And then the last guy I want to talk about is Christian Herberholz, who came in to pitch the bottom of the ninth inning on Sunday with the Orioles leading 4-3. And I pride myself on knowing pretty much everyone in this system, everybody who could appear at a big league spring training game. I said, who is Christian Herberholz? Well, apparently the Orioles signed him to an undrafted free agent deal in mid-July out of Auburn. He did not get drafted, right-handed pitcher. Orioles signed him, and then for whatever reason, I'm not sure if it was injury or they just shut him down for workload, he didn't actually pitch for the Orioles in the minors in 2024 after being signed. So that's probably why I didn't know him, but I'll tap my chest on that one. I feel like I know everybody. I did not know him. He had a 5.4 ERA, 49 Ks, and 43 innings at Auburn last season before the O's signed him. Now, it wasn't the greatest inning. He loaded the bases. He gave up a 2-run walk-off single in the bottom of the ninth. But he was 93, 95, good ride on his fastball, nice changeup. He struck out our old friend Elio Prado. You know, that seals the deal right there to open up the ninth inning. But yeah, just had to tap my chest on that one. I did not know a player who appeared in Orioles spring training, and certainly my apologies to Christian Herberholz. If you find this, let's have you on the podcast. But that is my bad right now. Now I know him, and we'll be looking out for him as he makes his Orioles minor league debut in 2025. But that's all the pitchers I wanted to talk about. I know that took a while, but we had a lot of data to comb through this weekend. Now, let's talk about the hitters. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, it is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. The live betting feature is great on FanDuel because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. And plus, the FanDuel app, it's super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we move things along to the hitters who had some notable outings or appearances over the weekend in the 3 Orioles spring training games. And let's start with Jackson Holliday, who hit a home run on Friday. 107 off the bat, 378 feet, crushed a ball to right field. Fastball in the inside corner from a righty. It was actually the Twins Rule 5 pick, a reliever trying to make their roster, and Holliday just smoked it over the fence. Then on Sunday, in a left-on-left matchup against Phillies' Christopher Sanchez, one of the better left-handed starters in the majors, he got a sinker on the inside corner, turned on it 103 off the bat, ripped it into right field for a base hit. That was impressive. And then immediately stole second base. He had 2 stolen bases this weekend, and it was impressive for multiple reasons. One, Christopher Sanchez, a lefty who holds runners really well, only allowed 3 stolen bases all of last year, and JT Realmuto was the catcher back there for Philly. That combination rarely allows a stolen base, and Holliday took one on him. And Holliday also, he should look to run more this season. And he said to the media after the game, he's looking to steal at least 20 bases in 2025. He's got elite speed. It's something he should do. It's something Brandon Hyde has said. He wants the Orioles to run, be more aggressive on the base path this season. I think that is a great combo to get Jackson in there. He's looked really solid this spring. Did have to shout out Kobe Mayo because he had mostly a rough spring, but he did hit a ball 110.4 on Friday, so that was certainly nice to see. And then the Orioles' comeback was cool. I mean, you know, it's a spring training game. What does it really matter? But the O's were down 10-6 heading into the top of the ninth Friday against the Twins. Excuse me, bad math, 10-5. They score 8 runs in the top of the ninth and end up winning that game 13-10 on Friday. Judd Fabian had the game-tying double, a 101 exit velocity off the bat. And then Dylan Beavers was the hero. Go-ahead 2-run homer in the ninth, 102 off the bat, 384 feet. So cool moment for the 2 outfield prospects that'll be playing a whole lot in AAA to begin the year and will be trying to get themselves to the big leagues in 2025. Just kind of a cool spring training thing. Get 8 runs the ninth inning and win a ball game. Then we go to Saturday, where we don't have the StatCast data, but we did have the broadcast. And Paul Skeens, you may have heard of him, was starting that game for the Pirates on Saturday. Adley had a nice looking single off of Skeens in the first inning. Change up on the outside corner. Ridiculous pitch from Skeens. Adley just put the bat out there and flicked it into left field for a base hit. That is vintage Adley. That is first half Adley. That is 2023 Adley, the things he was doing over and over and over again. And then in the fourth, he lined out but smoked a ball out to right field. His at-bats looked really, really good on Saturday. Then you got to shout out Luis Vasquez, who I've been impressed with all spring. Came over on a waiver, or a small trade, basically a waiver claim from the Cubs. Young shortstop. Crushed the ball off Paul Skeens. Unfortunately, it landed just foul down the left field line. If not, it would have been a homer for Luis Vasquez off Paul Skeens. That would have been something he would have been talking about for a long time, but did end up singling to right field later in the at-bat. Then he ripped an RBI double the other way to right center field off of one of the Pirates' top pitching prospects, Thomas Harrington. That came in the fourth inning. He continues to make some great plays at shortstop. Now, on that double, O'Neal Cruz maybe took the worst route to a fly ball I have ever seen a center fielder take. He's still learning that position after the Pirates kind of transferred him from shortstop to center field late last year. But Vasquez has looked good. Again, not really sure there's a spot for him on the roster, but it's one of those situations like I talked about Friday. If these nagging injuries for Gunnar Henderson or Jordan Westburg continue and they have to miss time, Luis Vasquez might be the first guy I call on. I've really liked what I've seen from him so far this spring. Now, I just have to say something weird about Dylan Beavers, who had the awesome home run Friday. He laid down a bunt versus Paul Skeens on Saturday. Like, okay, it's nice to see if you can try and do it. But when, as Dylan Beavers, a guy trying to show that you are still a good prospect in the Orioles system, when are you going to get other chances to face the best pitcher in the world maybe right now in Paul Skeens? I don't love wasting that at-bat by bunting. I doubt Brandon Hyde put that sign on. It seems like Beavers did it on his own, trying to bunt for a base hit. He was thrown out on the play. Just, not something I would do if I were Dylan Beavers. But the last guy, of course, I got to talk about it again. I think in every single Spring Training Notes episode I've done so far this spring, I have talked about Samuel Basallo, the Orioles' #1 prospect. Well, he continues to do awesome stuff. On Saturday, he was catching throughout G1 Bay, trying to steal second. I mean, an absolute strike on that throw. We know how good Basallo's arm strength is behind the plate. He showed it off on Saturday. That was a laser beam, perfect throw to throw him out. Then on Sunday, he got the start as the DH. He booked it up the line on a ground ball to third base, ended up being safe because of catcher's interference, but beat it out either way. That was really impressive speed that he showed. Then Jordan Romano came in, former all-star closer, threw a slider to Basallo, and Basallo just took it and scooped it into right field for a base hit. And then he showed more base running aggressiveness. It was a first and third spot. Livan Soto was on first. Basallo was on third. Soto stole second. The throw got away from the shortstop. And Basallo took off for home, and that ball did not get away by very far. It was a close play on the throw to the plate, but Basallo dove in there safely, running the bases hard, trying to make his presence known, besides just as a huge hitter. And again, probably not going to be on the opening day roster, but he's showing us more and more that he can do some things to get him to Baltimore and the big leagues at some point this year. And I can't say it enough how much I cannot wait to see Basallo in a true Orioles uniform in a big league regular season game. But that'll do it for the pitching and the hitting notes. We had a lot more to get to, some injury stuff, some others to talk about from the weekend, and we'll get to that to finish off the show coming up next. So I wanted to touch on the final pieces of notes from the Orioles weekend in spring. This is something I should have talked about with the hitters. I just forgot to get to it, but Terrin Vavra has a bit of a stance change. It's something we've talked about already with Jackson Holliday this spring, but if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, you can see the picture on the left. That is Vavra from September of last year with the AAA Norfolk Tides. The stance we've seen from Terrin Vavra since he got to the big leagues with the Orioles in 2022, kind of crouched over with the bat angle, knees bent, trying to flick the ball out to left field. Then the picture on the right is from him in the lineup on Saturday in the Orioles spring training game in Sarasota against the Pirates. Look at how straight up and down he is. The bat is now kind of at a horizontal angle right behind his head, going straight back instead of going up in the air. His stance is much more open. His front foot, the right foot, is swung out way towards first base now. Just a different look. Vavra's a guy who hits for average, doesn't really hit for power at all. We'll see if this is because of the shoulder. He had a gruesome shoulder injury over the past year plus. Maybe this is a reason why he'd be doing that. Although, the picture on the left, he had already had the shoulder injury. Maybe this is more comfortable. Maybe this helps him get more power in his swing. Not sure. Again, he's going to be a guy who's going to start the year in AAA Norfolk, but just kind of interesting, something to point out, a new stance for a guy like Favre, who we've seen in the big leagues a few times at this point. Some other news from the weekend. Let's start with some injury stuff. Andrew Kittredge is experiencing some left knee soreness, veteran right-handed reliever who the Orioles signed to a 1-year, $9 million deal this offseason after a great year with the St. Louis Cardinals last year. Kittredge actually warmed up in the bullpen on Saturday, looking to throw his second outing of the spring, but did not come into the game, and we found out why. It was left knee soreness that took him out. Hyde said he is day-to-day. Now, if this becomes a longer issue, this is where some of the guys like Brian Baker or Colin Selby or Matt Bowman maybe step up and steal a randomly opening day roster spot in the bullpen. But again, day-to-day, it's March 3rd. Hopefully Kittredge is all good to go, but he is into his mid-30s, so something to monitor as he did not come into that game on Saturday. Gunnar Henderson, who hasn't played since late last week, he left the game in the first inning on Thursday with lower right side discomfort. We talked about that in Friday's episode, what the Orioles would do if they didn't have Henderson for a stretch of time. Henderson said he was still sore on Friday, woke up still sore, but the Orioles were not going to do an MRI. That continues to be a good sign that they're not worried about it. They gave him the entire weekend off, and then Brandon Hyde said on Sunday that Henderson's still a little sore. It's still going to be a couple more days before he resumes baseball activities, but there is no talk of him missing any kind of extended time. And again, seems like everything pointing to he'll be good in a week or so. He'll be fully ready when the Orioles get to opening day in really just over 3 weeks from now at this point. Jordan Westburg has been dealing with a back injury. He played in the Orioles spring opener back on February 22nd. That was last Saturday. He has not played since, been dealing with a sore lower back. He did some light throwing on Friday, and then he started swinging the bat for the first time on Sunday. So Westburg is slowly progressing back to the field. I would say if I'm worried about either, I'm much more worried about Westburg than Henderson. He's just on a slower timeline and has missed more time at this point. But again, it's spring training. The Orioles are going to be as cautious as possible. Let's hope by some point next week, maybe he can get into some spring training games and get himself ready for opening day. I also talked about back on Friday's episode, make sure to check that one out, what the Orioles would do if Westburg had to miss some time at the beginning of the season on the injured list. Tyler O'Neill was away from camp on Saturday. Turns out it was just due to an illness. He was back in camp Sunday. Hyde said he expects O'Neill to be back in the lineup here on Monday. So really nothing to worry about there. And then Felix Bautista, who's thrown 2 live bullpens this spring, but has not thrown in a spring training game. Brandon Hyde said Sunday that the plan is for Bautista to pitch in today's spring training game here on Monday. The game is on both MASN and ESPN, Orioles Red Sox, and look out for that one because it looks like Bautista will get his first game action this spring as he tries to get himself ready for opening day. Couple more things. The Orioles are reportedly going to build up Roansy Contreras as a starter. Contreras, who they have now claimed twice off waivers this offseason, the right-handed pitcher who was a really good starter with the Pirates back in 2022 and 2023, then has kind of fallen off since then, ended up with the Angels and a couple of other teams this offseason. Still young, still 25, still has good stuff. He's stuck in with the Orioles. 2 outings so far. They've been an inning and a third perfect. But, he was a starter with the Pirates back in 2023. Then they moved him to the bullpen. I just think building up Contreras as a starter, which means his next couple outings will be 2 and then 3 innings as he gets into games this week for the O's. Just means they have another starting option if they need it. They kind of have 10 of them in camp right now. Contreras gives them an 11th. That's just kind of nice to have. And he is out of options, and I can't really see him making the team, so I'm not sure what the O's are going to do with him. They're probably just going to DFA him and hope that he clears waivers and stays with the org. But here's what I'll say. If Albert Suarez continues to struggle, as we talked about earlier, and he has another really bad outing, it's not impossible that a good Roansy Contreras could take Suarez's roster spot as the long man in the bullpen on opening day. It's not out of the question at all. Contreras, at this point, a much higher ceiling than a guy like Albert Suarez has. And if it's the way for the O's to hold on to Contreras and Suarez looks really bad, I could see them making that move. So just something to think about. And then Brandon Hyde, speaking of the starting rotation, he did kind of confirm the rotation when he was talking on Saturday. Basically said if all guys are healthy, now he said in no particular order, but Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, Dean Kramer, Charlie Morton, and Tomoyuki Sugano are the 5 starters, and he called Albert Suarez number 6 and Cade Povich number 7. Those are all things that we've talked about on this show so far, but it was interesting. It was still February at that point when Hyde actually said that to the media. Again, not surprising. We kind of figured it with the moves the Orioles have made this offseason, but just something to monitor as the Orioles continue to get these guys their work in. It seems like at this point they have a plan for the starting rotation, but it's hard to plan out pitching because pitchers get injured, and that's why the Orioles have this depth and have someone like Roansy Contreras to be more depth for the starters. And then finally, the Orioles made their first cuts of spring training, sent a bunch of minor league players back to minor league camp. Catcher Silas Ardoin, right-handed pitcher Justin Armbruster, outfielders Dylan Beavers, Enrique Bradfield, and Judd Fabian, relievers left-hander Jacob Hernandez, right-hander Yarmil Geraldo, right-hander Robinson Martinez, Carlos Tavera, the righty, Nate Webb, the righty. Who else got sent down? The infielder Jeremiah Jackson, who was here on a minor league deal. None of these guys really ever had any kind of chance of making the opening day roster, so none of them very surprising that they'll go to minor league camp. There are still guys who will appear in some major league spring training games, but they'll be the guys who kind of travel with the team on a one-off basis. They won't be everywhere with the team. But the one move that was kind of intriguing from Sunday was that Colin Selby was also optioned to minor league camp and optioned to AAA. Selby, a right-handed reliever who the Orioles brought in on waivers last year, had really good stuff, pitched a couple of times for the Orioles in September, and actually made the postseason roster in the bullpen. Now, he did not appear in either game when the Orioles were swept by the Royals in the wild card series, but he was on that roster, and it was someone that I was really high on and thought maybe had an outside chance of, even with the bullpen looking pretty full, making the opening day roster. And I've talked about how, hey, if Felix has to start the year on the IL, the first name I would turn to is Colin Selby to make the team. And now he's been optioned to minor league camp on March 2nd. Now, again, that doesn't mean he can't make the roster. Last year, Nick Vespi got sent to minor league camp, and then 2 days later, the O's had an injury, and they just put Vespi on the opening day roster anyway, so it doesn't end things for Selby. There might be something they're specifically working on, and they don't want him to do it in spring training games. They want him to do it in the Twin Lakes facility, on the backfields, whatever it may be. Maybe it's a little injury. Who really knows at this point? But kind of surprising for a guy who's on the 40-man, who I think was in the mix to at least try to make the opening day roster. Surprising that more than 3 weeks before opening day, he's like the first cut of the legitimate guys to go down to minor league camp. See if we learn any more about that this week. But that one kind of caught my eye a bit, and maybe a little biased because I'm a huge Colin Selby fan. But I still think no matter what happens, like he's going to help the Orioles at some point out of the bullpen this season. But that'll do it for today's episode. There was a lot of notes to get to. Couldn't quite keep it to 30 minutes, but we try our best here at the Locked On Orioles podcast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Subscribe wherever you listen. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. That really, really helps out the show. Orioles have a televised game today. No StatCast for it, but Charlie Morton, Tomoyuki Sugano, and maybe even Felix Bautista will be pitching in Orioles Red Sox. It'll be on MASN and on ESPN here on Monday, which will be fun to see that one. I will be back tomorrow. Now, we're going to do 3 episodes this week without kind of looking at spring training numbers. The Orioles are off on Tuesday. Then Wednesday, there is, I believe, StatCast, but no broadcast for that one. And then Thursday, they have a night game, which is no broadcast, no StatCast, even though Paul Skeens is pitching. And so on Friday, we'll recap all the spring training action from this week. But during the week, we'll get into some more, season preview content. Tomorrow, we're going to look back on Adley Rutschman's 2024 season finally and try to figure out what the heck went wrong for Adley in 2024 in the second half, and what can he do to switch back to normal Adley in 2025. That is coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.